Caden Velaris had never expected to be the one to change the galaxy. He was just a man from a backwater planet on the edge of space, where humanity had long been forgotten by the vast empires that ruled the stars. On the world he called home, life was simple and struggles were constant, but Caden had always felt like there was more to the universe than what he had been told. A young man with a natural curiosity, he spent his time studying old texts and trying to understand the ways of the galaxies beyond. The world around him was harsh but peaceful in its own way, and it was this quiet existence that hid the potential that lay dormant within him. Then everything changed when the first starship appeared on the horizon. It was not the usual kind of ship one would expect to see in a world like his. It was large and ominous, dark, and foreboding, with a design that spoke of advanced technology, the kind that only the most powerful civilizations could produce. The ship landed with a thunderous roar, sending tremors through the earth beneath him. Out of the ship stepped beings that looked nothing like humans at all. They were tall and towering, with skin that shimmered like metal and eyes that seemed to burn with cold fire. They were the Zerantha, a warrior race known throughout the galaxy for their strength and brutality. They had come to take control of the planet and its resources, a prize that would be easy to claim given the planet's isolation and lack of defenses. The Zerath demanded immediate surrender from the local governments, threatening to destroy everything if they did not comply. Caden's world was thrown into turmoil as leaders scrambled to respond to the invaders. But what the Zerath didn't know was that Caden was no ordinary human. He had spent years learning about tactics and strategy from the ancient texts he had scavenged over the years. What started as a passing interest in warfare soon turned into an obsession as he studied the intricacies of military history and the art of battle. It was in the quiet moments of his life that Caden had come to understand that warfare was not just about strength, but about knowing how to outthink an enemy. He knew the Zerath had superior technology and numbers, but he also knew that power alone was not always enough to secure victory. He watched them carefully as they established their foothold on the planet, their arrogance palpable as they demanded the surrender of the people. When they launched their first assault on a neighboring settlement, Caden knew it was time to act. He gathered a small group of local fighters and devised a plan to strike at the Zerath where they were most vulnerable. They had no advanced weapons, no heavy artillery, just sheer determination and Caden's intellect guiding them. The Zerath expected easy prey, but Caden's carefully laid traps and clever maneuvers sent them into disarray. He outwitted them at every turn, forcing the invaders into retreats and leaving them scrambling for answers. It was a fight the Zerath had not anticipated, a battle where their strength was rendered useless by a human who understood how to turn the tide with nothing but brains. The victory was unexpected and shook the Zerath to their core. In that moment, Caden realized something profound. The galaxy was vast and filled with dangers, but it also held endless opportunities for those who knew how to seize them. Caden had just proven that even a single human could change the course of events in the universe, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Caden's victory over the Zerath was only the beginning of something much greater. Across the galaxy, rumors spread of a human who had bested one of the most feared warrior races with nothing but his wits and a small band of fighters. The galaxy's elites dismissed it at first, thinking it was nothing more than a fluke that the Zerath had underestimated their opponent. The Zerath themselves were furious at their defeat and promised to crush this human with all their might. But Caden knew better than to rest on his laurels. He knew the attention he had drawn would only bring more danger, and he had to be prepared. He spent the following weeks learning all he could about the galaxy's power structures, the different species, and their capabilities. Every encounter, every piece of knowledge he gained helped him sharpen his mind and grow even more confident in his potential. Caden quickly realized that his real weapon was not just his ability to outthink his enemies, but his ability to inspire others to believe in a different way of thinking. He didn't just fight for survival, he fought for something greater, for the hope that the galaxy could be more than just a collection of warring factions. His ideals began to resonate with the oppressed races who had long been subjugated by the larger empires. The people saw him not as a warrior, but as a leader, someone who would fight for them and bring about real change. The first of many came to him in secret, a group of dissidents from a planet that had long been under the thumb of the Zerath. They told Caden of their suffering, how their people had been forced to work in the mines of their world to fuel the Zerath's war machines. They had been silenced for years, but now they saw in Caden the chance to rise up. Caden didn't hesitate. He listened to their stories, their pain, and he formulated a plan not just to liberate their people, but to send a message to the rest of the galaxy. He struck at the heart of the Zerath's operations on their planet, using their own systems against them to free the oppressed workers. The liberation was swift and precise. The Zerath were caught off guard as Caden's tactics tore through their strongholds with surgical precision. Once again, the Zerath were forced to retreat, humiliated by a human who had learned their ways and exploited their weaknesses. But what truly stunned the galaxy was not just the success of the mission, but how it had been accomplished. Caden had avoided large-scale destruction, he had used minimal force, and had proven that war didn't have to be about annihilation. Instead, it could be about liberation, about giving power back to those who had none. As the news of the liberation spread, Caden's reputation began to grow. The oppressed races saw him as a symbol of hope, and they flocked to his side, ready to fight for a new galaxy, where strength didn't just belong to the powerful, but to those willing to rise and fight for what was right. The elites of the galaxy began to take notice, and they were not pleased. The idea of a human rising against them threatened everything they had built, and they quickly realized that Caden was not just a fleeting figure. He was a force that could change everything, and they would do whatever it took to stop him. Caden's influence continued to grow, and with it came the realization that he was no longer just a figurehead for the oppressed races, but a true leader capable of reshaping the galaxy. His victories had turned him into a symbol of change, but it was his mind that set him apart from the rulers of the galaxy. As his following swelled, Caden knew he had to take a more strategic approach. The galaxy was vast, and its power structures were deeply entrenched. To truly change things, he would need more than just supporters. He would need allies, and not just any allies, but powerful ones, who could help him challenge the galaxy's elite. He began to study the political systems of the different empires and factions with the same intensity he had applied to studying military tactics. He understood that winning battles on the ground was important, but winning the hearts and minds of the people was what would truly give him lasting power. He worked tirelessly to form alliances with the galaxy's lesser-known species, those who had been cast aside by the larger empires. They were eager to join him, not because they feared him, but because they believed in the vision he offered. Caden's ability to connect with them and understand their needs and desires gave him a unique edge. Where others saw a collection of weak and scattered races, he saw an opportunity to unite them under one banner. One by one, he brought these factions together, forging a coalition that was as diverse as it was powerful. Each alliance came with its own set of challenges, but Caden's brilliance as a strategist allowed him to maneuver through the complexities of diplomacy with ease. He didn't just rely on force or promises of power to win over his new allies. He listened to them and made sure that their voices were heard in the decisions that shaped their future. He used his understanding of human nature to appeal to their sense of justice and fairness, offering them something they had never received from their former rulers: a seat at the table. As the coalition grew, so did its strength. The once fractured and disparate races began to see the benefits of unity. Under Caden's leadership, they trained together, fought together, and began to see themselves not as individuals or separate species, but as part of something greater. His ability to inspire loyalty and trust was unmatched. The galaxy's elites began to grow nervous as their carefully constructed power structures started to shift. They saw that Caden was not just a skilled warrior or a brilliant tactician. He was something far more dangerous. He was a visionary, a leader capable of bringing about a change they could not control. The more they tried to undermine him, the more he outsmarted them. He anticipated their every move and used their own arrogance and underestimation of him to his advantage. Caden was not just playing a game of military strategy. He was playing a game of politics and diplomacy, and he was winning. His rise was no longer just about fighting back against the tyranny of the galaxy's elite. It was about creating a new order where strength was not defined by military power, but by the ability to unite and lead. And in this new order, Caden knew there would be no place for the corrupt rulers who had built their empires on the suffering of others. The galaxy was on the brink of something extraordinary, and Caden Velaris was the one who would make sure it was realized. Caden's rebellion had reached a critical point. The galaxy was on the verge of something monumental, but it wasn't going to be easy. His vision was clear. He wanted to unite the galaxy under a new banner, one of equality and justice for all races. But the road ahead was fraught with obstacles. The powers that controlled the galaxy were not going to let go of their dominion without a fight. Caden knew that the elite factions would stop at nothing to maintain their stranglehold on the galaxy. The key to his success was not just in defeating them on the battlefield, but in dismantling the very systems that allowed them to thrive. It was time for him to turn his attention to the heart of the galaxy's power, the political and economic centers that kept the elite in control. He knew that a few key victories on these fronts could break the foundation of the empire and send shockwaves across the galaxy. But doing so would require more than just military might. It would require him to outthink his enemies at every turn. He gathered his most trusted advisors and allies and began planning a series of calculated moves aimed at weakening the empire's core. Caden's plan was simple in its brilliant strike at the heart of the economic system that fueled the elite factions and exposed their corruption to the galaxy. He began by targeting the trade routes that connected the galaxy's largest empires. These trade routes were the lifeblood of the empire's economy, and any disruption to them would cause a ripple effect throughout the galaxy. Caden's forces set up strategic blockades and began intercepting vital shipments of supplies and resources. The Empire's trade ships were no match for the guerrilla tactics Caden had perfected. With every successful interception, the Empire's resources began to dwindle, and their supply chains started to unravel. Caden knew that the longer he could keep the trade routes in chaos, the more pressure he could put on the Empire's leaders. But it wasn't just about economic pressure. Caden knew that he had to expose the lies and corruption that had allowed the elite to maintain their power for so long. He had spies within the highest ranks of the Empire who sent him information about their secret dealings and covert operations. He used this intelligence to his advantage, leaking documents and exposing the Empire's darkest secrets to the public. The galaxy was stunned by the revelations of how the elite had been manipulating entire worlds for their own gain. It was the kind of truth that shattered the illusion of invincibility that had surrounded the Empire for so long. With the Empire's grip on the galaxy weakening and its economy collapsing, the oppressed races saw their chance to rise up. Caden's rebellion was no longer just a movement, it was a revolution. Factions that had once been enemies now stood side by side, united under the banner of Caden's vision for a new galaxy. The galaxy's elite were beginning to feel the weight of their own corruption as their empire started to crumble from within. And Caden was more determined than ever to see his vision fulfilled. The war was far from over, but the battle for the soul of the galaxy was finally beginning to tilt in his favor. Caden had become more than just a man, he had become a force of nature. And the galaxy was about to change forever. Caden's momentum had reached a fever pitch, but with success came unforeseen challenges that threatened to undo everything he had fought for. His strategic brilliance had won him countless victories, but now he was about to face his greatest trial yet. Betrayal. It came when he least expected it, from one of his most trusted allies, a powerful alien general named Jera, who had been with him since the early days of the rebellion. Jera was a fierce and capable leader whose loyalty had never been in question. But as the rebellion gained strength and the Empire's grip on the galaxy loosened, Caden began to notice cracks in his inner circle. Whispers of discontent began to spread through his ranks, and soon it was clear that Jera had grown disillusioned with Caden's vision. She felt that Caden's focus on unity and peace was too idealistic, and that the galaxy needed more than just new leaders, it needed a complete reshaping of power. Jera believed that only through absolute strength could the galaxy be truly free, and she was willing to take whatever steps necessary to achieve that goal. It wasn't long before Jera made her move. She secretly aligned herself with the remnants of the Empire's most powerful factions and began plotting to overthrow Caden and seize control of the rebellion. It was a calculated strike, a move designed to fracture the alliance Caden had worked so hard to build. The betrayal came when Jera's forces launched a surprise attack on one of Caden's most vulnerable supply depots. The attack was swift and devastating, catching Caden's forces off guard. His trusted commanders were captured, and several key leaders were killed in the ambush. Jera's forces had not only betrayed him, but had left a trail of destruction in their wake. Caden was shaken but not defeated. He had spent years studying the tactics of the galaxy's most powerful empires, and he knew that this was the moment where true leadership would be tested. He gathered his remaining forces and regrouped quickly, refusing to let Jera's betrayal define him. But even as he prepared to fight back, he couldn't shake the feeling of doubt that crept into his mind. Had he made a mistake trusting so many people with his vision? Had he failed to see the cracks in his own rebellion? It wasn't just Jera's betrayal that troubled him, it was the realization that the galaxy was full of people who wanted to control it for their own gain. Even those who had once shared his ideals were susceptible to the lure of power. Caden knew that the fight for the galaxy's soul was far from over, and that the greatest challenge he faced might not come from the Empire, but from the people he had once considered allies. As he prepared for the inevitable clash with Jera and her new faction, Caden couldn't help but wonder if the dream he had fought for was slipping further away. The stakes were higher than ever, and the rebellion that had once been united was now fractured in ways he hadn't anticipated. But one thing was certain. Caden Velaris was not going to let betrayal stop him from achieving his vision of a better galaxy. No matter the cost, he would fight until the very end. Caden stood on the edge of his command ship, staring out into the stars. His mind was heavy with the weight of the betrayal that had rocked his rebellion and the uncertainty that loomed over him. Jera's attack had not only disrupted his forces, but had also created a deep fracture within his ranks. The rebellion that had once been united in purpose was now divided, with many questioning their loyalty to Caden and his vision. The doubts that had crept into his mind now seemed to grow louder. Had he been too trusting? Had he let his ideals blind him to the reality of the galaxy? He thought of the faces of those who had followed him and fought beside him. They were counting on him to lead them to a new future, a galaxy where they could be free from the tyranny of the old powers. And yet here he was struggling to hold everything together. But even in his moment of doubt, Caden knew one thing for certain. He couldn't give up now. The stakes were too high, and the cost of failure was too great. He had seen firsthand what the old empires had done to his people and to countless others across the galaxy. He couldn't let Jera's betrayal be the end of everything he had fought for. He called his most loyal commanders to a war council. There was no time to waste and no room for weakness. It was time to regroup and refocus. As his commanders arrived, Caden could see the doubt in their eyes, the fear of what had just happened. But there was also something else, a flicker of determination that reminded him why they had followed him in the first place. They believed in him. Caden addressed them firmly, speaking with the same conviction he had used when they first started their fight for freedom. He told them that this was not the time to falter or retreat. The Empire may have thought they had weakened him, but they had underestimated the resilience of those who stood with him. He reminded them of the victories they had won together and of the millions of people across the galaxy who were looking to them for hope. The rebellion had been built on the idea of unity and strength through cooperation. That vision had not changed despite the challenges they faced. Caden knew that they had to strike back quickly and decisively before Jera and her faction could gain any more ground. They couldn't afford to wait for the enemy to come to them. They would take the fight to Jera. Caden's strategy was simple. He would split his forces into smaller groups and hit Jera's key strongholds where her forces were concentrated. He knew that Jera's new alliance would be vulnerable if they were forced to fight on multiple fronts. Caden's forces were outnumbered, but he had learned long ago that numbers alone didn't determine victory. It was about being smarter, faster, and more resourceful than the enemy. They moved quickly across the galaxy, coordinating with their allies to launch simultaneous strikes against Jera's strongholds. Caden's brilliance in strategy shone through as he anticipated every move Jera made and countered it with precision. The rebellion's forces fought with unmatched determination. Each victory they won seemed to reinvigorate their spirit and renew their belief in their cause. Jera's faction began to crumble as the rebellion's attacks wore them down. What had seemed like a crushing blow to Caden was now turning into an opportunity to take back control. With every battle they won, Caden's confidence grew. He knew that they were not just fighting for the future of the galaxy, but for something more. They were fighting for the very ideals that had brought them together in the first place. And as Caden watched his forces advance with unwavering resolve, he knew that the fight was far from over, but he had finally regained his footing, and the galaxy would soon see that his rebellion was far from finished. Caden's forces had gained ground with every passing day, and the momentum of the rebellion seemed unstoppable. But as they advanced deeper into the heart of Jera's territory, Caden began to realize that the stakes were higher than he had imagined. The once proud empire was crumbling under the weight of his resistance, but it wasn't going down quietly. Jera's new alliance was fighting back with everything they had left, throwing everything into desperate counterattacks. The battles were fierce, and Caden could see the toll they were taking on his forces. The losses were mounting, and despite his strategies, his soldiers were growing weary. There were moments when the weight of leadership felt like too much. He had to be the one to make every decision and bear the responsibility for every life lost in this war. Even the smallest misstep could lead to disaster. He knew that the rebellion's strength had always been in its unity, and it was starting to fracture under the pressure of the constant battles. Rumors of dissent began to circulate within his ranks as some questioned whether Caden's vision was truly worth the cost. But Caden wasn't about to let the rebellion fall apart now. He had to find a way to push through the fatigue and doubt that was creeping into the minds of his people. The answer came when a messenger arrived with news of a hidden weapon. A long-lost relic from the ancient wars of the galaxy said to possess unimaginable power. It was located on a distant world deep in the uncharted regions of space. Caden knew that the discovery of such a weapon could turn the tide in their favor and bring an end to the war once and for all. But there was a catch. The world was heavily guarded by Jera's forces, and any attempt to retrieve the weapon would be met with fierce resistance. Caden weighed the risks carefully. To send his forces on such a mission would mean leaving them vulnerable to attack. But the potential payoff was too great to ignore. With no time to waste, Caden decided to take the risk. He personally led a small group of elite soldiers on a covert mission to retrieve the weapon. The journey through the uncharted regions was treacherous, and they encountered numerous obstacles along the way. But Caden's leadership and quick thinking allowed them to navigate the dangers and reach their destination. The ancient world was a desolate place, a remnant of a long-lost civilization. The weapon was buried deep within an abandoned temple guarded by automated defenses left behind by the ancient builders. Caden's team fought their way through the temple, battling both the mechanical guardians and the ever-present threat of Jera's forces. It was a battle that tested their resolve, but Caden's determination was unyielding. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the chamber that housed the weapon. It was a relic beyond anything they had ever seen, a device that hummed with a strange energy and a power that seemed to resonate deep within Caden himself. He knew that this weapon could give them the edge they so desperately needed. With the weapon in hand, Caden's team made their way back to their forces. The journey had taken a toll on them, but they had succeeded in retrieving the key to victory. Now the final confrontation was inevitable. Caden was ready to end the war and bring his vision of a new galaxy into reality. The future of the galaxy was within his grasp, and he was determined to seize it no matter the cost. Caden returned to his forces with the ancient weapon in hand, and the galaxy seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The rebellion had suffered great losses, but this new weapon gave them a fighting chance to strike a decisive blow against Jera and her forces. Caden knew that this would be the final confrontation, the moment where everything he had fought for would either be realized or shattered forever. The rebellion was exhausted, but there was a renewed sense of hope among the soldiers. They had seen their leader lead them through impossible odds before, and now, with the ancient weapon in their hands, they knew that the tide could turn in their favor. Caden gathered his commanders and laid out the plan. This time, they would not play defense. They would go on the offensive. He had learned that waiting for the enemy to come to them was a mistake. They would march directly to Jera's stronghold and confront her forces head-on. The battle would be fought on their terms. The plan was risky, but Caden's conviction had never been stronger. The time for playing small was over. It was time to seize the galaxy's future. They moved quickly across the galaxy to the heart of Jera's last bastion of power. Jera's forces had fortified their position and were prepared for an all-out assault. Caden knew that they would face fierce resistance. But this time he wasn't alone. He had forged alliances with the galaxy's oppressed races, and they stood beside him as one united front. The rebellion's forces were smaller in number, but they were united in purpose and driven by the vision that Caden had given them. The final battle began with the roar of engines and the clash of weapons. It was a brutal and chaotic fight, as both sides threw everything they had into the battle. The ancient weapon was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It cut through Jera's defenses with terrifying ease and turned the tide of the conflict. But as the battle raged on, Caden found himself face to face with Jera herself. She had been waiting for this moment, and there was no hiding the anger in her eyes. She had once believed in Caden's vision, but now she saw him as a threat to her own vision of power. "You think you can change the galaxy with your ideals," Jera spat. "The galaxy has always been ruled by power, not by dreams." Caden stood tall, his eyes locked on hers. "It's not about ideals, it's about people who have been crushed by the weight of empires like yours." The two leaders clashed in a fierce confrontation. Jera's strength and ruthlessness were unmatched, but Caden's determination and resolve gave him an edge. The battle was intense, but in the end, Caden emerged victorious. Jera fell defeated, her forces scattered as the rebellion swept through her stronghold. Caden's victory was not just a personal one, it was a victory for every race that had ever been oppressed by the galaxy's elites. He had done it. He had broken the cycle of tyranny and had created a new beginning for the galaxy. In the aftermath of the battle, Caden addressed his people. He told them that this was not the end, but a new beginning. The galaxy was theirs to shape, and the future was now in their hands. With the defeat of Jera and the fall of the Empire's last stronghold, the galaxy was free. Caden had conquered the throne of the galaxy, but not through force or domination. He had done it through unity, through the belief that a better future was possible for all. And in that moment, Caden Velaris became the galaxy's true ruler, not by title, but by the power of his vision and the strength of the people who had followed him. The galaxy was forever changed, and Caden's name would be remembered as the one who conquered the throne through hope and determination.